The room is sterile and silent, bathed in the cold, unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights. The air is thick with unspoken words, heavy as a shroud. In the center of it all sits an oak chair, painted a garish, cheerful yellow. This is Yellow Mama, Alabama's electric chair, and it looks like a throne from a nightmare. Thick leather straps hang from its arms and legs, and a mess of wire snakes from its base to a control panel on the wall. Strapped into the chair is Lynda Lyon Block, 54 years old. Her face is a pale, emotionless mask. She wears a simple prison uniform, her head shaved to accommodate a metal cap from which a damp sponge protrudes, dripping slightly. Through a pane of thick glass, witnesses stare, journalists with notepads, the victim's family, state officials. Their faces are a mixture of grim duty, morbid curiosity, and sorrow. Mike Haley, the Alabama police commissioner, watches intently, later describing her stare as utterly blank, devoid of any feeling. Lynda's eyes are fixed forward, seeing nothing and everything. She has refused a last meal. She has offered no final statement. There is only the low hum of the prison's electricity, a sound that promises a sudden, violent end. A warden gives a nearly imperceptible nod. An unseen hand throws a switch. An immense electrical power surges, a deep, angry buzz that fills the room. Lynda's body goes rigid, straining violently against the leather straps. Her fists clench, her jaw set like stone. A thin wisp of steam rises from the sponge on her head and the electrode on her leg. It is a grotesque, horrifying tableau, a human being turned into a conduit for raw voltage. Then, the buzzing stops. Silence rushes back in, more profound than before. This was Lynda Lyon Block, the 775th person executed in the United States since the return of capital punishment. The first woman put to death in Alabama in 45 years. And the very last person in America to be executed by the electric chair without being given a choice. Her death marked the end of an era. But to understand how a life ends in a flash of state-sanctioned fire, you have to understand where it began. Before she was a cop killer, an anti-government extremist, and a death row inmate who volunteered to die. She was a wife, a mother, an opera lover. A woman who once dedicated her life to her community. Years earlier, in a bright room filled with the gentle Florida sun, a younger Lynda Block, vibrant, and in her early 40s, stood at a podium. As president of the Friends of the Library, she was articulate, charming, and passionate. She smiled warmly at the room. And so, with the proceeds from the bake sale and the silent auction, she announced, "We're not just buying new books. We're investing in the minds of our children. We're building a sanctuary of knowledge for everyone in Key West. Thank you all for your incredible support." The room broke into applause. Lynda beamed, the picture of civic pride. But a different education was taking place in the quiet of her home. At night, she would sit with her common-law husband, 𝗟𝘆liche, a man with an intense, magnetic quality. Spread across their coffee table were pamphlets and books on constitutional law and government overreach. "It's not a theory, Lynda. It's a fact," he would tell her. The moment you get a driver's license, a social security number, you're making a contract. You become their property. A 14th Amendment citizen, a slave to the federal corporation. Lynda traced the text with her finger. So all of it, taxes, licenses, registrations, it's all illegitimate? "It's a cage," Sibley insisted, "and they've tricked everyone into walking into it willingly. But we don't have to. We can be free, truly sovereign. We just have to renounce the contract." His words were a key turning a lock in her mind. The distrust of authority she'd harbored since her abusive childhood finally had a name, a philosophy. In their backyard, under the cover of darkness, they stood before a small fire burning in a metal drum like priests at an altar. One by one, they fed their lives into the flames. Birth certificates, driver's licenses, social security cards. The plastic curled and melted, the paper turned to black ash. It was a baptism by fire, a severing of all ties. With every document that burned, they believed they were reclaiming their freedom. In reality, they were backing themselves into a corner that would soon turn deadly. The first act of violence was not against the state, but against the family. In August 1992, the air in 𝗟𝘆 Block's apartment was stale and thick with menace. Lynda's 80-year-old ex-husband was bound to a chair, a gag in his mouth, terrified. This wasn't about ideology. It was about a house, a petty property dispute that had festered. Lynda stood over him, her face contorted with a rage that had replaced the community volunteer. "You were warned," she said, her voice low and shaking. "You were told to leave it alone." She held a knife. In one swift, brutal motion, she stabbed the elderly man in the chest. Without another word, she and 𝗟𝘆liche fled, leaving him for dead. They would later plead no contest to the charges, but never show up for sentencing. They were now fugitives. From that moment on, every police car was a threat. Every request for an ID was a potential cage. They were no longer just sovereign citizens in their own minds. They were wanted criminals in the eyes of the law, a law they were prepared to meet with violence. On October 4th, 1993, Sergeant Roger Lamar Motley, an 18-year veteran of the Opelika Police Department, a husband and father of 4, was heading to Walmart on a routine supply run. For him, it was just another Monday. But in the parking lot of that Walmart, his world of duty and order was about to collide with Lynda Block's world of rebellion and rage, and only one of them would walk away. What happens when a man sworn to uphold the law confronts a woman who believes she is above it? The answer is written in blood. If this story is already gripping you, show your support by hitting that like button, subscribe to see how this tragedy unfolds, and comment below with your thoughts. The parking lot of the Opelika Walmart on October 4th, 1993, was a sea of asphalt shimmering under the Alabama sun. It was a place of errands and ordinary life, filled with the low rumble of shopping carts and the rhythmic slam of car doors. People moved with the unthinking purpose of a Monday afternoon, their minds on grocery lists and after-school pickups. Inside one of those cars, a nondescript vehicle that had become a makeshift home, Lynda Block's 9-year-old son sat waiting. To most, he was invisible. But one woman, a passerby with a keen sense of empathy, noticed him. She saw something in his eyes, a flicker of distress that cut through the afternoon's mundane rhythm. She felt a pang of concern, a feeling that this family might be in trouble, perhaps living out of their car. It was a small act of human connection, a decision to get involved that would unknowingly light the fuse on a powder keg. She saw Sergeant Roger Motley's patrol car cruising through the lot and flagged him down. He listened patiently as she explained her concern, her voice a mixture of apology for bothering him and insistence that something wasn't right. She gave him the car's tag number. For Motley, an 18-year veteran, this was the definition of routine. A welfare check. 1,000 times in his career, he had approached a car to ask a question, to offer help, to simply check on a citizen. He was a protector, a man who had given his life to this community, and a child might need him. He located the vehicle, parked his patrol car behind it, and stepped out into the sunshine. George Sibley watched the officer approach in his rearview mirror. The uniform, the badge, the calm authority. It was everything he and Lynda had come to despise, the physical embodiment of the federal corporation they believed had enslaved the nation. Motley was polite, professional. He simply asked 𝗟𝘃 for his driver's license. For 𝗟𝘃, this was not a request. It was a challenge. He didn't have a license, nor did he believe he needed one. He launched into a prepared monologue, a lecture on his personal theory of freedom, of sovereignty, of why the laws of the state of Alabama did not apply to him. The air grew thick with tension. The quiet hum of the parking lot seemed to fade, replaced by the charged space between the two men. Motley, a man of procedure and law, was faced with a man who lived in a different reality, governed by a set of rules written only in his own mind. The conversation went nowhere. Then, in a heartbeat, the debate ended, and the violence began. 𝗟𝘃 would later claim Motley put his hand on his service revolver first. But witnesses saw it differently. They saw George 𝗟𝘃, unprovoked, reach into his car, pull out a semi-automatic pistol, and open fire. The first shots shattered the afternoon peace. The sound was alien here, a brutal intrusion of chaos. Shoppers screamed and dove for cover behind cars. Motley, reacting on pure instinct, threw himself back toward his patrol car, drawing his own weapon as he moved. He returned fire, and a bullet struck 𝗟𝘃, wounding him. The gunfight was on. Lynda Block was at a payphone nearby when the familiar crack of gunfire reached her ears. She didn't flinch. She didn't run for cover. Her response was immediate and chillingly precise. She dropped the phone, drew her own 9mm Glock pistol, and ran directly toward the fight. Witnesses would later testify that she didn't just run and fire wildly. She assumed a practiced, deliberate firing stance, crouching to steady her aim. Sergeant Motley was now trapped in a deadly crossfire. As he focused on the threat from 𝗟𝘃 in the car, Lynda opened fire on him from behind. A bullet tore through Motley's chest. He hadn't been wearing his bulletproof vest. He had given it to another officer who needed one. The impact threw him to the ground. Wounded and bleeding on the hot asphalt, his training kicked in. He struggled to get back into his patrol car, perhaps to radio for help, perhaps to retrieve the shotgun locked inside. Lynda kept firing. She would later say she feared he was going for a bigger weapon, that she had no choice. She fired again and again as the dying officer tried to escape. Mortally wounded, Sergeant Motley managed to get into the driver's seat. His car began to roll forward, a ghost vehicle moving aimlessly through the lot, striking several parked cars before lurching to a final stop. As chaos erupted around them, Lynda and the wounded 𝗟𝘃 scrambled back into their own car, their son still inside, and sped away, leaving a decorated police officer, a husband, and a father of 4 to die in a pool of his own blood. He was pronounced dead at the East Alabama Medical Center, his life taken in the line of duty while trying to help a child he thought was in danger. The fugitives had escaped, but their stand against the government had just begun. Now, they were not just wanted for assault. They were wanted for the capital murder of a police officer. The hunt is on. We'll ride with law enforcement as they close in on the killers, leading to a tense standoff that will reveal the depths of their fanaticism. If you believe in justice for Sergeant Motley, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below. Panic erupted in the Walmart parking lot like a contagion. The sharp, brutal sounds of the gunfight gave way to a cacophony of car alarms, shouting, and the approaching sirens of a city's entire police force descending on the scene. But by the time the first patrol cars skidded into the shopping center, Lynda Block and George 𝗟𝘃 were gone. They had vanished back onto the anonymous asphalt arteries of Opelika, their car a fleeting shape disappearing into the flow of traffic, leaving behind a fallen officer and a scene of chaos. Inside their vehicle, the air was thick with the coppery smell of 𝗟𝘃's blood and the electric charge of adrenaline. Lynda's 9-year-old son, a silent witness to the entire bloody affair. was trapped in the back seat with them. A child who had just seen his mother and her husband gun down a police officer in broad daylight. The manhunt was immediate and absolute. Every officer in the region heard the frantic radio call, "Officer down." It is the most dreaded transmission in law enforcement, a call to arms that galvanizes every man and woman with a badge. For the Opelika Police Department, it was personal. Roger Motley was not just a uniform, he was a friend, a mentor, a brother. They had shared coffee with him that morning and joked with him in the squad room. Now, he is gone. Grief would come later. For now, there was only a cold, focused rage and a singular mission: find them. Roadblocks materialized on highways and county roads. A description of the fugitive's car was broadcast across the state and into Georgia. Every available officer, from city police to county deputies to state troopers, joined the search, a dragnet tightening with every passing minute. Lynda and 𝗟𝘋𝗆 didn't get far. They were fugitives, but they were amateurs, driven by a warped ideology, not a calculated escape plan. They were spotted on Wire Road in the neighboring city of Auburn, a short drive from the scene of the crime. The sight of police cruisers converging on them, lights flashing, but sirens silent, must have been the moment their abstract war against the government became terrifyingly real. They were cornered. Their car, now a steel prison, rolled to a stop. What followed was not a desperate final shootout, but a tense and bizarre standoff that lasted for hours. Surrounded by a small army of heavily armed officers, Block and 𝗟𝘋𝗆 refused to surrender. This wasn't just about avoiding arrest anymore, it was a political stand. From within their car, they engaged in a strange, one-sided negotiation, not for their freedom, but for the validation of their beliefs. They were no longer just Lynda and George. They were self-proclaimed sovereign citizens, martyrs for a cause no one but them seemed to understand. They claimed the courts had no jurisdiction, that the officers surrounding them were agents of an illegitimate corporate entity, and that they, as free people, were immune to the laws of Alabama. For the officers taking cover behind their vehicles, guns trained on the couple, it was a surreal and infuriating ordeal. Their friend and colleague lay dead, and his killers were lecturing them on constitutional theory from behind a rolled-up car window. Every minute that ticked by was a test of patience, a battle between the professional restraint of the officers and the raw human desire for immediate justice. They held their positions, waiting, their faces grim masks of discipline. They knew that inside that car was a child, the same child Roger Motley had died trying to help, and his safety was now paramount. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the pavement, the standoff reached its breaking point. Perhaps it was the sight of the overwhelming force arrayed against them, the realization that their ideological bubble had finally burst against the hard reality of flashing blue lights and drawn weapons. Or perhaps it was the wound in 𝗟𝘋𝗆's side, a painful reminder of their mortality. Whatever the reason, after hours of defiance, they gave up. The car doors opened slowly. First Lynda, then the wounded George 𝗟𝘋𝗆 emerged with their hands in the air, surrendering to the very authority they had sworn to reject. They were taken into custody, their brief, violent rebellion brought to an inglorious end on the side of a road in Auburn. They were arrested and charged with capital murder. The gunfight was over, but their war was about to move to a new battlefield, the courtroom. And it was there that Lynda Block would begin her final, most defiant stand, a legal battle she had no intention of winning, but one she was determined to fight on her own terms, even if it cost her life. In Scene 4, the trial begins. Witness Lynda Block's shocking courtroom strategy as she fires her lawyers, declares herself a sovereign citizen, and puts the entire legal system on trial. If you're captivated by this story of ideology and consequence, please like this video, subscribe for the next scene, and comment with your thoughts on this case. The courtroom was a world of straight lines and somber wood, a place where life was ordered by precedent and procedure. It was a stage built for the solemn machinery of justice. But from the moment Lynda Block walked in, she refused to play her part. She didn't see herself as a defendant accused of a terrible crime. In her mind, she was a political prisoner, a free woman being held captive by a fraudulent corporate entity masquerading as a government. And she was determined to make everyone in that room, from the judge on his high bench to the jury in their box, understand that they were the ones who were truly on trial. Her first act of defiance was to fire her court-appointed attorneys. They were competent, dedicated men who were prepared to fight for her life. But to Lynda, they were part of the corrupt system she had renounced. The judge, a man who had presided over countless trials, was taken aback. He leaned forward, his voice patient but firm, trying to penetrate the wall of her ideology. He painstakingly explained every stage of a capital murder trial, the complexities of jury selection, the rules of evidence, the life or death stakes of the sentencing phase. He warned her again and again of the profound disadvantages she would face as a non-lawyer against a team of seasoned prosecutors. "Ms. Block," he pleaded, "it is in your best interest to accept the aid of counsel." Lynda stood firm, her voice clear and unwavering. She wasn't just refusing a lawyer, she was rejecting the entire premise of the court. "I do not consent to these proceedings," she declared, her words echoing in the stunned silence. Her argument was not one of innocence in the traditional sense, but of jurisdiction. She argued, with the fervent conviction of a true believer, that the state of Alabama had no authority to try her because it had never been properly readmitted into the Union after the Civil War. To the prosecutors, the jury, and the victim's family, it sounded like the ravings of a madwoman. To Lynda, it was the unimpeachable truth, the foundation of her entire worldview. In the gallery, Roger Motley's family watched in disbelief. His wife, his children, his fellow officers, they had come seeking justice for a man they loved, a hero who had died trying to help a child. Instead, they were forced to watch his killer transform the most solemn of proceedings into a bizarre political theater. Every moment she spoke, every nonsensical legal theory she spouted was another twist of the knife, an insult to the memory of the man she had gunned down in cold blood. They sat in stoic silence, their grief a heavy, tangible presence in the room, a stark contrast to the defendant's cold, intellectual detachment. The trial proceeded, a surreal clash of two irreconcilable realities. The prosecution laid out its case, which the appellate court would later describe as virtually impenetrable. They presented the eyewitnesses from the Walmart parking lot, the forensic evidence, and Lynda's own admission that she had fired at Sergeant Motley. Against this mountain of evidence, Lynda offered only her unwavering belief that the court was illegitimate. She didn't cross-examine witnesses in a conventional way. She challenged their right to testify against a sovereign citizen. She didn't present a defense, she presented a manifesto. The jury was not swayed by her ideology. They saw the facts. They saw the widow of a slain police officer, and they saw a woman who admitted to firing her weapon at him. They found her guilty of capital murder. During the sentencing phase, they listened to the aggravating circumstances, that she had knowingly created a great risk of death to many people in that crowded parking lot, and that she had killed an officer to avoid arrest. By a vote of 10-2, they recommended the sentence of death. When the judge formally imposed the death penalty, a wave of quiet relief washed over the Motley family. But Lynda Block did not weep. She did not beg for her life. Her expression remained a mask of calm defiance. In her mind, the sentence was not a punishment, but a validation. The corrupt state was going to kill her for daring to stand up for the Constitution. She was no longer just Lynda Block. She was a martyr. In her final act of contempt for the system she despised, she did something that shocked even the most hardened court observers. She waived all of her appeals. She willingly, even eagerly, consented to her own execution, choosing to die for her beliefs rather than acknowledge the authority of the court that condemned her. She had volunteered for Yellow Mama's embrace. The final scene is upon us. We will walk with Lynda Block to her last moments on Earth and witness the end of an era in American justice. To see the conclusion of this incredible story, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the finale, and comment below with your thoughts on this trial. The years on death row did not soften Lynda Block. The Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women became her final monastery, a place where her convictions hardened into something unbreakable. She saw no reason for remorse because in her reality, she had committed no crime. She was a soldier in a war only she and a few others could see, and her death was not an execution, but a martyrdom. While other inmates fought for their lives with appeals and pleas for mercy, Lynda fought to die. She had waived her rights, dismissed the legal system, and now, on May 10, 2002, the state of Alabama was ready to grant her wish. In her final hours, she was visited by 3 friends and a spiritual advisor. There were no tears, no desperate goodbyes. The atmosphere was one of quiet resolve. She refused to request a last meal, a final act of defiance against the state's rituals of death. She would not grant them the satisfaction of a final, humanizing request. As midnight approached, she was transported to Holman Correctional Facility, the place where Yellow Mama waited. The chair, with its cheerful yellow paint, was a grotesque piece of Alabama history, infamous for the gruesome, botched executions of the past. But tonight, it would perform its duty one last time, closing a brutal chapter in the history of American capital punishment. Strapped into the chair, Lynda's face was a blank canvas. The Alabama Police Commissioner, Mike Haley, who witnessed the execution, would later be haunted by her stare. It was, he said, a very blank stare, an emotionless stare. She offered no final statement, no apology to the family of the man she killed, no last words for the world she was leaving. At 12:01 a.m., the switch was thrown. A massive 2,050-volt charge surged through her body. Witnesses saw her body tense violently against the straps as steam rose from the electrodes on her head and leg. At 12:10 a.m., Lynda Lyon Block was pronounced dead. She was the first woman executed in Alabama in 45 years, and the last person in the United States to be put to death by the electric chair without a choice. 3 years later, George Sibley's time ran out. Unlike Lynda, he had fought his sentence, clinging to the legal process he once scorned. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, he filed a handwritten petition claiming that Lynda alone had fired the fatal shot. The man who had stood with her in defiance, who had shared her ideology to the point of murder, tried to save his own life by sacrificing her memory. It was a final, pathetic betrayal. The state was unmoved. On August 4, 2005, George Sibley was executed by lethal injection, his final words a defiant claim that his executioners were the real murderers. The story of Lynda Block is a tangled web of conviction and consequence. She was a community volunteer who became a killer, a mother who became a martyr for a fringe ideology. Her actions left a hole in the heart of a family that can never be filled. Sergeant Roger Motley's children grew up without a father. His wife without a husband, all because he stopped to help a child he thought was in danger. His memory lives on, not as a symbol of a political battle, but as a testament to a life of service and sacrifice. And that leaves us with a question that cuts to the very heart of this story. Lynda Block believed she was a patriot, dying for the Constitution. The state of Alabama believed she was a cold-blooded killer who deserved the ultimate punishment. She saw herself as a victim of a tyrannical government. Roger Motley's family sees him as the victim of a senseless act of violence. Where does the truth lie? Is it possible for a person to be both a terrorist and a true believer, a murderer and a martyr? This is where the debate truly begins, and we want to hear from you. Was Lynda Block a dangerous extremist who got what she deserved? Or was she, in her own twisted way, a casualty of her own unshakable principles? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. This is a story that should be discussed. If you found this journey compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the cases that shape our world.